Hello and welcome to Dunning-Kruger Philosophy, home of oversimplified summaries of complex ideas. For today's episode, we're going to be having a brief look at the life and works of zoologist, historian, writer, anarcho-communist activist, and former prince, Peter Kropotkin. Born in 1841 into a Russian princely family, descended from a branch of the Rurikid dynasty, Peter Kropotkin grew up amongst the highest levels of Russian society. Despite this, he seems to have been deeply dissatisfied with the highly stratified nature of Russia, even from a young age. Reportedly, from the age of 12 he began refusing to be called prince, even going so far as to rebuke his friends for doing so. However, this did not stop him from being enrolled in the highly prestigious Corps of Pages at St. Petersburg, a place where the children of the rich and powerful would be groomed to rule as the next generation of the aristocracy. He would eventually graduate first in his class. Now this could have led to a highly lucrative career as a bureaucrat or administrator in the halls of imperial power. Such a life was not for him, no. Desiring to do something useful, Kropotkin elected to leave the center of the Russian state behind and willingly moved to Siberia. After spending some time as an aide-de-camp to a Russian general with various radical connections, Kropotkin ended up going on several scientific expeditions into the Siberian wilderness. This time is said to be key to the development of many of his anarchist beliefs, inspiring much of the work behind mutual aid, a factor in evolution, which is written, in my eyes, as both a rebuttal of social Darwinism, which Kropotkin saw as a gross perversion of the theory of evolution, and as a recontextualization of the history of human development. He saw mutual aid as one of the most important factors in human society, stating, "Practicing mutual aid is the surest means for giving each other and to all the greatest safety, the best guarantee of existence and progress, bodily, intellectual, and moral." Kropotkin seeks to assert that under any circumstances, sociability is the greatest advantage in the struggle for life. This should be, and previously was accounted for in how our societies function. If socialization is our greatest strength, then we should make use of it. So we then must acknowledge the importance of mutual aid, collaboration, and interdependence. In the modern day, some of these ideas are reinforced by our greater understanding of human history. For example, the archaeological records suggest that the first group of Homo sapiens to spread throughout the planet emerged probably no earlier than 300,000 years ago from the Horn of Africa. According to the recent African origin of modern humans theory, and somewhat unfortunately for the earlier Homo sapiens and other hominids, they were quickly outcompeted, replaced, or subsumed by a newer group from East Africa that emerged sometime between 70 and 50,000 years ago. The key difference between the new branch and the previous ones being the size of the groups themselves. Some kind of adaptation had occurred, allowing them to utterly outcompete the less social and smaller groups, leaving a trail of megafauna corpses wherever they went. Though this book was not published until 1907, a lot of the key ideas underpinning it were already beginning to take shape in Kropotkin's mind. After returning from Siberia in 1872, and spending a few years travelling and taking part in activism throughout France, Switzerland, and his native Russia, Kropotkin was eventually arrested in 1874 in Russia for taking part in subversive activity. In the run-up to his trial in 1876, with the help of some friends, he managed to escape from prison and flee Russia to live a life in exile. After spending some time in various European states, Kropotkin faced a second imprisonment, this time in France. This imprisonment did not last long, however, and he was subsequently released after agitation from the lower house of French Parliament. Kropotkin eventually settled in England, living in various parts of the country, ranging from Brighton to Harrow. It was during this time that much of his work was published, including the next text which I will now briefly touch on, The Conquest of Bread. After greatly enjoying mutual aid, I ended up listening to an audio recording of The Conquest of Bread on LibriVox, thanks to a wonderful recording by the Audible anarchists. If you decide to listen, make sure you choose this one, as the recording quality of the other copy is not great. Whilst I don't know if I fully agree with all the ideas, methods and suggestions he presented here, there was an underlying humanity and sentiment in this work that resonated deeply with me. I even began to read out various quotes to my spouse, much to their annoyance when they were trying to rest or relax. It was from them that I learned something I wasn't aware of. That this was the inspiration behind the name BreadTube, which, if you don't know, according to Wikipedia, BreadTube or LeftTube is a loose and informal group of online content creators who create video content, often video essays, live streams from socialist, communist, anarchist, or other left-wing perspectives. Neat. But anyway, the following passage is one of my favourites in the book, and does a great job of portraying the character of both this work and the author himself. The means of production being the collective work of humanity, the product should be the collective property of the race. Individual appropriation is neither just nor serviceable. All belongs to all things for all men, since all men have need of them, since all men have worked in the measure of their strength to produce them, and since it is not possible to evaluate everyone's part in the production of the world's wealth. All things for all. Here is an immense stock of tools and implements. Here are all those iron slaves which we call machines, which saw and plane, spin and weave for us, unmaking and remaking, working up raw matter to produce the marvels of our time. But nobody has a right to seize a single one of these machines and say, "This is mine. If you want to use it, you must pay me a tax on each of your products," any more than the feudal lord of medieval times had the right to say to the peasant, "This hill, this meadow belongs to me, and you must pay me a tax on every sheaf of corn you reap, every rick you build." All is for all. If the man and woman bear their fair share of work, then they have a right to their fair share of all that is produced by all, and that share is enough to secure them well-being. No more of such vague formulas as the right to work, or to each the whole result of his labour. What we proclaim is the right to well-being. Well-being for all. I found this passage to be powerful. It really struck an chord with me. A right to well-being. What a wonderful idea. What an inspirational message. I don't know if Kropotkin is right about the way we achieve this society, but it definitely sounds like one worth striving for. And yes, this all does sound rather utopic, at least in the colloquial sense of the word, but what a dream. One that has been echoed by many in this day and age. Hell, if I was to take an example from fiction, the Federation from the Star Trek universe is in some ways like the living embodiment of this ideal.
The acquisition of wealth is no longer the driving force in our lives. We work to better ourselves and the rest of humanity.
But if this is all so great, what is stopping us from living in this paradise, this utopia where all is for all, where science, education and culture are celebrated for their own sakes, not for the sake of profit, for the sake of well-being? Well, according to Kropotkin, in our civilized societies, we are rich. Why then are there many poor? Why this painful drudgery for the masses? Why, even to the best paid workmen, this uncertainty for the morrow? In the midst of all the wealth inherited from the past, and in spite of all the powerful means of production which could ensure comfort to all in return for a few hours of daily toil? The socialists have said it and repeated it unwearingly. Daily they reiterate it, demonstrating it by arguments taken from all the sciences. It is because all that is necessary for production, the land, the mines, the highways, machinery, food, shelter, education, knowledge, all have been seized by the few in the course of that long story of robbery, enforced migrations and wars, of ignorance and oppression, which has been the life of the human race before it had learned to subdue the forces of nature. It is because, taking advantage of alleged rights acquired in the past, these few appropriate today 2/3 of the products of human labour and then squander them in the most stupid and shameful ways. It is because, having reduced the masses to a point at which they have not the means of subsistence for a month, or even a week in advance, the few can allow the many to work, only on the condition of themselves receiving the lion's share. It is because the few prevent the remainder of men and women from producing the things they need, and force them to produce not the necessities of life for all, but whatever offers the greatest profits to the monopolists. In this is the substance of all socialism. What Kropotkin describes sounds eerily similar to the world of corptocracies and technocrats that some say we are living in today. I think his diagnosis of the problem is pretty spot on here, but whether he has any solutions to share, well, that's up for you to decide. Personally, I think he does have some useful insights, and I highly recommend to anyone who has the time to read or listen to either Mutual Aid or The Conquest of Bread. If you lack the time or interest, there is always BBC's In Our Time podcast with Melvin Bragg, which has a fantastic episode on him. But before we finish up, I want to tell you about the last few years of Kropotkin's life, as he did not die in England. In fact, he decided to move back to Russia after the February Revolution of 1917. He was greeted with crowds of thousands and thunderous applause. Initially offered a ministerial position in Russia's new government at the time, the Duma, which he probably somewhat wisely turned down, as V.I. Lenin's October Revolution was right around the corner. Kropotkin was initially warily supportive of the October Revolution for its potential to transform Russian society. However, he very quickly grew critical of the increasingly authoritarian and centralized nature of Soviet Russia, criticizing Lenin both in person and via letters, without getting executed. Which, considering the content of these critiques, is really surprising. Listen for yourselves. Vladimir Ilyich, your concrete actions are completely unworthy of the ideas you pretend to hold. Is it possible that you do not know what a hostage really is? A man imprisoned not because of a crime he has committed, but only because it suits his enemies to exert blackmail on his companions. If you admit such methods, one can foresee that one day you will use torture, as was done in the Middle Ages. I hope you will not answer me that power is for political men a professional duty, and that any attack against power must be considered a threat against which one must guard oneself, at any price. This opinion is no longer held even by kings. Are you so blinded, so much a prisoner of your own authoritarian ideas, that you do not realize that being at the head of European communism, you have no right to soil the ideas which you defend by shameful methods? What future lies in store for communism, when one of its most important defenders tramples in this way every honest feeling? This might just be my own bias and ignorance talking, but this is probably the only time I've heard of someone successfully criticizing Lenin without facing any repercussions. He even got a state funeral in 1921 at the age of 78. It was the last gathering of anarchists that Russia would see for a very long time. Though we have yet to achieve a society that lives up to Kropotkin's ideal of a right to well-being, his influence is still felt in many ways today. His writings, ideals and story challenges many of our traditional understandings of the world and could still play an important role in bringing about a brighter tomorrow. This has been Jay from Dunning-Kruger Philosophy, and thank you for listening to this brief dive into the life and works of the man who would not be a prince, Peter Kropotkin. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, or do all three, or none of the above. It's up to you. Thanks again, and I hope to see at least some of you again soon.